Nikon has just teased the new D6 camera. This is going to be probably $6,500 to $8,000 camera. It's going to be very expensive. It's their flagship camera. Does anyone actually care about this camera? And could it be the very last flagship DSLR Nikon ever makes? That's what we're going to talk about today. If you guys do not follow this camera, to be perfectly honest, I don't really, and I'm a Nikon shooter. This is a sports camera. Nikon just came out with this little teaser saying it's in the works, but they have not released any information about it, although we do have a lot of rumors that we're going to be talking about. But they also released some video that just kind of is ambiguously talking about how important autofocus is and stuff, and it's just a guy shooting with the D5.
Right. So it's a very strange announcement. It doesn't seem very coordinated. Yeah. And it doesn't seem like something a professional company like Nikon would do.
Yes. Now.
But they did list D6 on this webpage, so
right.
It is talking about the next camera.
Yeah, and it has other videos that will be coming out soon. It says coming soon on these videos, and they're just blacked out right now. So I'm sure they're going to be teasing more and more about this camera to get people like us somewhat excited. But the truth is, I was never a buyer for this level of camera.
Yeah, I didn't either. I never bought a D5.
I do know some wedding photographers that bought it, and that's our background was in wedding photography, because I do like the idea of a low megapixel, high ISO, incredible autofocusing camera. So anyway, I wanted to talk about this camera specifically because I feel like with mirrorless cameras on the way up now, people, I mean, just a year or two ago, we were like, we're not interested in mirrorless cameras. Now we shoot almost exclusively video with Panasonic mirrorless cameras. I have finally purchased a Sony camera. I have used the Sony A9, and that was like the final nail in the DSLR coffin, in my opinion. Did you ever get to use that camera?
I think I was there when you were filming a review, but like I never.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, it's such a small body, but the thing that blew my mind most of all, the autofocus and silent shooting. So if you guys aren't familiar with the way camera sensors work, they accept light that's coming through the lens, and then the shutter covers the sensor, and then it reads each one of those pixels one by one, and then it actually creates the image once the shutter is closed, and this is what saves it from the rolling shutter plague. Whereas if you don't use the shutter and it's just trying to grab images right off the sensor, it's having to read each line of pixels one by one. Most cameras, especially with large sensors, are very slow at this, and that's why if you're taking video and you're panning, you're getting all the crazy warping and stuff going on. The Sony A9 was the first camera ever that you can literally use it completely silently. No moving parts whatsoever, and it's just grabbing images from the sensor. And although it's not quite as fast as if you use the shutter, the pictures look great. Yeah. You could actually use it like that for sports, which are fast-moving subjects, which to me is such a game changer. I mean, it's so weird to me when I'm watching, like, you know,
press conference and
and you just hear clack, 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 clack throughout the entire thing. The president is speaking right here, and there's people clicking. It seems crazy to me. Like,
I thought it was hard enough making these videos with all the lights. Could you imagine if you heard by dozens of cameras?
Yeah, we have the technology now for these cameras to be completely silent.
Or, you know, the U.S. Open's right now. If you were serving and you just...
I know, you hear it on TV.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's very strange.
I think my dream for a D6, my dream for any of these cameras is to have a true global shutter. Because in my mind, let's get rid of the shutter before we get rid of the mirror. Like, I want to be able to sync flash with unlimited sync speeds. Yeah. I want to be able to pull an image off with no, you know.
So to explain what Patrick's talking about right now, as I mentioned, if you're going to have the sensor reading light, it's having to go pixel by pixel, row by row, and it's a slow process. Yeah. A global shutter just means every pixel's reading at the exact same time.
And I would even accept a lower megapixel camera in order to do that. 12 megapixels with a global shutter for a photojournalist or a journalist out in the field who might be strobing and might be making, you know, little editorial type images. That would be unbelievable.
It would be unbelievable. You'd have no moving parts anymore. You could sync at any speed.
And if you're publishing for most magazines and newspapers, 12 megapixels is all you need.
And you'd have the best ISO performance in the world at that, and you'd probably be able to, it'd probably be one of the best video cameras in the world as well. So it's like that technology is the pivotal moment where everyone will immediately move to mirrorless. The second that technology is available, and you can put that in a camera, it will seem so archaic to have cameras that are clicking and moving around. It just won't make sense anymore. But right now, we are still getting slightly better performance with a physical shutter.
All right, so I have a list of things for me that I would love to see in not just the D6, but in most cameras. And maybe I could throw some of these out to you and see if these are things that interest you. Maybe they interest our audience. You can also leave comments and have this conversation go on forever. But one big thing is lower ISOs. What ISO are we at now? I don't even know how to say them. They're so high. It's like 300,000, you know. I don't care so much about the high ISO, but I definitely would love lower ISOs for longer exposures if you want to blur water and have kind of the neutral density effect. Or if you're trying to sync strobe at your maximum sync speed, in many cases, you know, you're stuck at 2/50th of a second. I'd love to go to ISO 10 or 1 and be able to control my ambient light and still be able to strobe.
I agree. I don't know the technical reason why cameras can't do that, but that is also another massive game changer, especially for videographers. If your camera could go to like ISO 1 or something ridiculous, then you wouldn't need neutral density filters anymore, and you could get that perfect shutter speed you want every time you're shooting. Or like you said, I mean, we shoot time lapses all the time. I was just shooting time lapses, and a lot of times you want that motion blur, and the only way to get it in the middle of the day is to bring filters along. It's a pain in the butt. So if a camera could figure out a way to really lower the ISO, that would be huge.
Now this one might be a little controversial among those photographers that are out in the field and they want that robust camera, but the D5 camera does not have an articulating screen either. And I feel like shooting video and shooting creative angles, having that screen that pops out has been a big game changer for me. And it's getting to the point where I feel like we take our cameras in some, you know, pretty treacherous environments, and besides some wind blowing off an unattended camera in Patagonia, we've had no problem with the articulating screen. Do you think they're going to put a screen that moves on the D6?
I used to be one of these pros that was like, I don't like things changing. Like, it's good the way it is, don't touch it. And I remember when people started coming out with the articulating screens, and I was like, that is a consumer feature. I don't want that crap on my pro camera. But then I used it and was like, oh, this is way better.
It sounds like a lot of people who use the, you know, electronic viewfinder for the first time. I'm still a fan of the optical viewfinder, but the more that I use that electronic viewfinder and I can put the camera wherever I want it and not have to crouch down, that's pretty nice.
I know. So yeah, and the other thing, I'm sure we're going to get to it in a second, one of the rumored features, and I feel like this is so important for the D6, it has to have better mirrorless performance and capabilities. Yeah, I mean, right now, if you guys have used any standard Nikon DSLR, it's got incredible autofocus when the mirror's down. You know,
it might have the best.
Maybe it has the best. I've recently watched a D5 versus A9 comparison video, and the A9 was actually winning with autofocus. But let's just say it's amazing.
But in live view.
But in live view, it's horrible. It's this contrast detection, and it's like always hunting around, and it's wrong a lot, and it just misses a lot. And so I feel like if Nikon wants to compete with these mirrorless cameras, the camera needs to be able to work with and without the mirror better than the current DSLRs do. And if it does, if they can do that, then the articulating screen is way more important, because now you're going to be taking pictures above your head and stuff. You know, imagine a football game at the end of the game. What do you see people on TV doing right now? Just brrr, they're not even looking at anything. They're just spraying and praying. At least you could turn the mirrorless feature on and look at what you're doing.
Yeah. So speaking of better mirrorless features, one of the big rumors, apparently there's an image that was leaked that might be the actual D6, and its prism on top is larger than the current D5, which makes people believe that either it has a larger viewfinder, kind of, I think the D850 might have a larger viewfinder than the D5, so it might be brighter and easier to see, or somebody speculated that what if it had a hot shoe that allowed you to put an electronic viewfinder on the hot shoe, much like what Fuji's done with their 100 megapixel camera. And maybe the big revelation is that the D6 can act as a mirrorless camera and still be a traditional DSLR. It seems crazy.
I have not read that rumor, but
I do not feel like Nikon is smart enough to do that, and I feel like they're stubborn enough not to do it, but that would be pretty amazing if you could just turn off the mirror function and lock it up and use it as a mirrorless. The only other thing that it could be is the pop-up flash has been added, which would be good news for you.
Yeah, I would be happy about that.
But if you see these two pictures, it's definitely larger, and it looks like there might be more electronics or something else in that space.
Interesting. I have not heard that rumor yet.
I mean, that's what everyone's talking about online. So.
Okay. Another rumor that everyone's talking about is that this will be the first Nikon camera ever to have internal sensor stabilization.
Oh, yes, that would be big.
Yeah, I wonder how that would work. I mean, Nikon was so adamant. It's kind of like Samsung going at Apple for the headphone jack and then removing it themselves. But I remember Nikon doing all these interviews and stuff saying that the best stabilization comes from the lens because it's going to be far more accurate in the lens.
This was made back in the days when Sony released their first alpha cameras.
Yep.
And as Panasonic users, we have both.
We do have both.
And it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
it makes it so easy to handhold video, and you have dual stabilization. I have no doubt that that's the best system.
Yeah. Now, I have heard some people say that they're worried about that moving around. We've had issues with the Panasonic. If you're like walking around on a gimbal or whatever and you turn it off, it still moves around in there.
Yeah.
And so
it doesn't completely lock.
One of the other rumors is that you might somehow be able to lock this down so that you get the best of both worlds.
Because if we're talking about a robust camera that you're taking out in the field and you're jumping out of helicopters and you're shooting sports and you're dragging it through the mud, having a sensor that moves seems like something you would not want.
Yeah.
Unless you could get much better photo quality, but more importantly, you could get much better video quality.
Right.
And now we know a lot of photojournalists are having to play these dual roles where you get the photo, but then you also get some video clips, and then you're able to submit that to your publication. And it's kind of like you get to hire one guy instead of having a video crew and a photographer.
Well, speaking of video, one of the other rumors is that it will be able to shoot at 4K 60 frames per second, just like our GH5s can.
That seems a little less exciting when so many other cameras do it.
Yeah, it's like it better have that feature because, our little cheapo cameras can do it so easily now. It's like our iPhones probably will be able to do it in a few months.
One feature that the Panasonic GH5 has is that you can shoot in 1080, but then you can go up to 120 frames per second. I think our GH5Ss, do they go to 210 or 180? It's some amazing, crazy number.
Yeah.
We find that really useful because we're video shooters. Do you think the average sports and photojournalistic photographer
They should. I mean, goodness, if you're shooting sports and you have a high frame rate camera in your hand, wherever you go, it drives me crazy how many photographers are still trying to fend off the video side of things. And they're like, I'm not a videographer, I'm still a photographer. And I'm like, you're not going to be a photographer soon if you keep having this attitude. Like, you already understand everything. You already own all the equipment. It's literally just like flipping a switch and hitting record, and you're doing the same thing.
I guess the problem, though, is if this camera is aimed towards sports photographers and you're going to be at the Olympics and you're going to be shooting the top athletes in front of you, are you going to want that pivotal moment to be in 120 frames per second video, or are you going to be spraying through 12 frames per second photos? Which you have to, at some point you have to choose what role you're going to play.
Listen, I get it. I understand. If you're going to the Olympics and you have this one spot you're allowed to stand in and you're hired by whatever to shoot for them, like, of course, you're going to be shooting pictures in that exact instance. But I have to imagine there's going to be other situations where you have multiple cameras, or, hey, I already got the shot, now I'm going to get a video clip of that exact same thing.
Or you're shooting a sport that may not have that definitive moment. You're shooting volleyball or something, and you just need some clips to like showcase that sport.
I've gotten some great shots of this match. Now I'm going to get some stuff to go along with the video they're going to put on CNN. And if you have one camera that can do it, if it's got that in-body stabilization that helps it, look steady in your hand, that's going to be huge. Well, a couple of other things that are rumored that I say obviously are true. 24 megapixels up from 20 or 21. Obviously, they always bump it up a little bit. And then better ISO performance, obviously.
In the high ISO realm.
Yeah, going up. I'm sure it'll be a little bit more sensitive. Better autofocusing. But the thing with autofocusing is, the autofocusing is amazing, and the Nikon cameras. Until you use the Sony A9 and you realize that you can focus all the way to the edges and it's focusing on people's eyes automatically and stuff. It's like, it feels like the future compared to an archaic system. And so I don't know what they're going to do to make this feel that much better than the A9. And then what is Sony going to come out with immediately?
Yeah, there's this game of like cat and mouse, you know,
Yeah.
who's going to release their, and maybe that's why Nikon released the statement, is to kind of get ahead of the curve.
Well, I kind of have the feeling that Nikon is seeing what's happening, and they're like, "Hey, don't leave yet.
Yeah.
Wait and see what we're about to release. It's going to be really cool, you guys. I promise." So we shall see. And then, of course, the big thing that we already mentioned was the improved silent shooting, which I feel like for so many photographers, they don't even consider it. But when you use it,
Yeah.
you just go, oh my gosh, it's such a more pleasant experience doing
I mean,
this.
we know photographers that are on sets, like for a lot of movies are being filmed in Charleston, and they have to use the blimp, you know, and it's got to be silent.
It's
As
ridiculous.
wedding photographers, how many times, I've said this so many times in other videos, how many times have you been kicked out of a wedding or been told that you can't shoot because
I
your
have
camera...
been told multiple times, you are not allowed to take a single picture during the ceremony because we will not have clicking in the church. And at the time, you know, this was years ago, there were literally no cameras that would shoot silently, so they just said all photography is banned. But if you could say, my camera is 100% silent, what could they, I'm sure they wouldn't stop you at that point. So total game changer. So one other thing that we've kind of touched on is video quality. I'm sure the D6 will be a much better video camera than the D5. But I just feel like I always liked Nikon cameras to shoot video just because I was comfortable with them and it was all I ever used until I used any other camera brand.
Yeah.
And I looked at the footage side by side, even when we were
have
shooting
videos on our
1080.
channel.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like my cell phone is taking better footage than our Nikon DSLR. And the audio sounds bad. It's just, there was so much that could have been improved.
And we started the entire Fstoppers channel on Nikon video.
Exclusive.
We were the only ones that were shooting on
Everyone
Nikon
told
cameras.
us we were dumb.
And it
we
got to the
brushed
point
them
where
all
we'd
off.
have 4K cameras. I mean, we'd have the D500, and the video quality still wasn't that good.
I know.
Even at 4K. And it would, you know, you'd pull up the GH5 and it blew it out of the water. And I'm thinking, what is the difference? And I think it might be the bit rate. Nikon just still limits the bit rate from their video so low that even though it's 1080 or 4K, it's not a quality 1080 and 4K.
There's that, but there's something else to it as well. There's something about the colors, and the dynamic range is just lost completely, at least in the older Nikons that we used to use. And so we hope all of that is improved. I'm sure it will be improved in the D6. But this all leads to the overall question. Is anybody going to buy this camera? Does anyone even care about this camera? And then, is this going to be the last premium DSLR Nikon ever makes? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, this camera is so expensive, and it fits. It really appeals only to the highest level photographer, and the highest level photographer is probably the most stubborn photographer who doesn't want to make the move to mirrorless. I just feel like the writing's on the wall. I mean, I still love to pick up my D850, and if I had to go do a photo shoot, that's the camera I'm going to grab. But I feel like maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I should be using a faster camera like the Sony A9, and I'm falling behind, you know? But I just think, you know, at the lower end level, if you're a prosumer or you're a photographer who's amateur, or you're kind of making a business out of it, you're going to jump to mirrorless and just learn on that system. It gives you pretty much all the advantages that you need.
In a smaller package.
And it's affordable and it's smaller for every reason. That, I don't know, I think it's just these pros that either need the high quality imagery with the fastest autofocus that balances well with a big lens and can go into the craziest weather conditions. Maybe it still makes sense for them, but it just feels like it's going to be the F5, where it's the last film camera. And if you need a film camera that is still able to do everything, do they still manufacture that camera? Can you still buy it?
I don't know.
I think you can go on B&H and still buy that camera. But at some point, I feel like we're going to hit the end of the DSLR era.
I have heard that the high-end cameras that Nikon makes they're never profitable. So all of these expensive lenses, the 400 2.8s and the D5s and everything,
They're sold at cost?
they're not making those to make money. Instead,
It's a marketing.
yes, Nikon is making these ultra high-end cameras and everything with the most cutting-edge technology to get the most professionals on board, get the best pictures at things like the Olympics, to set this standard of excellence. Now
To
everyone
turn on a sporting event and that's all you see as you see Nikon.
but also, Nikon has the ads and they can show that, like, this is the guy who was at the Olympics and he got this shot or whatever. And then when consumers need to buy a camera,
They think of that.
they know the Nikon name. And then all of the research and development that goes into these insanely expensive cameras trickle down into more affordable, smaller, consumer-level cameras. So for that reason, I hope the D6 is not the last ultra
Because that could be a
professional
big nail in the coffin for the imagery and what you think of when you think of Nikon.
Yeah.
If that's gone, and same I think holds true with Canon. If that's gone and you don't think of Canon and Nikon as being the top two cameras for the highest level professional, then it really opens up the door for the Sonys and the Fujis and all these other companies that, I mean, Sony does have some long lenses.
Now they do,
I don't
yeah.
know that Fuji really does though. Olympus is kind of out of the picture. Panasonic, I mean, none of the, it's kind of the third party manufacturers that are making these long lenses now, but Nikon and Canon are the two that are really still in the forefront.
Now, all that being said, maybe Nikon makes even better, more advanced cameras in the future, and they're just all mirrorless. I'm kind of ashamed to say I have yet to even hold one of Nikon's new mirrorless cameras. Yeah, we should probably
get one of those.
check those out, being that we own a photography website.
Well, it brings up the good debate of, is Nikon years behind, or are they able now to learn from all the manufacturers that have dipped their toes in the mirrorless world?
It's the Tesla question as well.
It's the Tesla question. And say, could Nikon and Canon, which just stepped into the mirrorless world in the last year, step up and take on all of these responsibilities and all this technology and like come ahead and produce the best mirrorless cameras with the best lenses?
Well, the reason why I never cared about the Nikon Z system or Canon's new system, I don't even know what it's called.
I think it's the R.
Is because I watched reviews online and people just said, oh, the Sony's still better.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, well then I'm not even gonna worry about that because I don't wanna have to rebuy all these lenses and everything. I'd rather just buy a Sony camera, which is what I did because people just said it was better. So I thought, okay, I like Nikon. It makes me sad to think that we might be moving away from Nikon, but I'm going to wait until they're at least competitive. And at this moment, it seems like they're a little bit below.
So we've talked a lot about this camera. I'm curious to hear what everybody online thinks about this. So if you have an opinion about the D6,
does this camera even matter?
Does this camera even matter? Is it the last camera? Which features would you like to see in it? Leave them in the comments below. I think this is kind of an interesting topic, especially since very few people out there are going to be buying this camera.
Yeah.
I certainly am not. You going to get a D6?
Hell no. I have no need for this camera. All right, thanks for watching.